I'm going to call our workshop to order. It is August 25th, 2020. It is our 4 p.m. workshop. We are starting 1 minute late, but we're pretty good, 4:01. With us right now, we have Mr. Miner, myself, Vice Chair Kennedy. Dr. Hopes will be joining us virtually, and Reverend Golden will be joining us shortly. It is also my understanding that Mrs. Vetter and Dr. Agruso are also joining us via Teams. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. I know that you may be on mute, so if you can just unmute yourself and make sure that we can all hear each other, that would be great.
I can hear everybody. Hello.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, we will begin with our audit committee update, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Vetter.
Thank you very much. All of our members were present for the Teams meeting we held on July 29, 2020. Mr. Scott Hansen, the Chief Technical Officer, spoke to the committee regarding enhancements that had been made to the overall IT environment, including a consolidation of servers and removal of some obsolete servers, general improvement of the security posture, an education campaign that focuses on phishing and how to recognize emails that are unsafe to open and how to recognize information that should not be shared. If the employee fails the test, they are then directed to videos to re-educate them, and servers have been relocated in a Hurricane Category 5 building. And Scott Hansen's report is attached, and he had additional comments. I've summarized them. Mr. Serge Jorgensen, president of Silent Group, addressed the report he had provided. It defines 5 categories of core function for IT: protect, detect, respond, recover, and identify, as defined by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is called NIST, the cybersecurity framework, and his report is attached. He also spoke to the committee regarding the timeline for the risk assessment that the audit committee has asked to have performed. Silent will begin proactive work in August, start engaging with the internal IT department in September, and expects to have results by November or December, depending on the receipt of the information supplied by the IT department. E-learning has placed great demands on the IT department, and reopening school has placed great demands on everyone. Mr. Tim Bergeron, the new Associate Superintendent of Finance, was introduced and gave us some highlights of his education and experience. Mr. Mark Smith from CRI gave us a slideshow presentation regarding the risk assessment that they performed and he discussed his methodology. Following a number of questions and comments, the committee recommended that the board approve the risk assessment and the audit priorities deemed the highest risks. And they also asked that the risk assessment be reevaluated, taking into consideration the ERP system issues. The ERP system touches the entire organization, but some departments are using the system more productively than others. Rather than evaluating the ERP system as a whole, CRI felt that to properly evaluate the system, each department must be considered. The committee will review the changes at its next meeting on September 2nd. The committee reviewed operational guidelines for the board internal auditor position revised by Dr. Agruso with input from Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Dye. The committee accepted the guidelines and the position was approved by the board on August 11th, 2020, and the position has been posted. The posting should be complete at the end of this week. The committee reviewed the transportation audit report. Mr. Scupp was the committee member that interfaced with management. The committee accepted the report, and Mr. Wagner will have action plans to be presented at the next audit committee meeting. There were only small recommendations made, and the department is running very well. A question was asked about how students are tracked on buses. Mr. Wagner reported that they have a new badge system, and the badge will be scanned as the student enters and exits the bus each day. And that report is attached. The committee reviewed the sales surtax report for 18-19. The audit committee is charged with determining that the sales surtax proceeds are spent on the types of projects documented in the referendum and reporting their findings to the school board. There were 3 items that the committee did not feel were appropriate uses charged to sales tax funds. The ERP, some ERP money, technology licenses, and a charter school expenditure. We have recommended to management that these items be corrected and agreed to note our opinion in the report. CRI will report back to the audit committee with its post-audit review report. So we would like that report approved also. In the next quarter, CRI will focus on completing the post-audit review reports for the audits completed in the last year and will work on the audit plan derived from the risk assessment following its approval. Following the last audit committee meeting, Mary Foreman, who is running for a board seat, resigned the chair position. I have been the acting chair since that point. At this meeting, I was nominated and elected chair for the 2021 fiscal year. Dr. Grusso was nominated and elected vice chair of the committee and agreed to be the committee liaison for the board internal auditor position. Respectfully submitted, Barbara Vetter. On a personal note, I understand what a difficult time this is for the district, and I am very appreciative of the help and assistance I have received from the staff, management, and especially Ms. Saunders. Internal auditing doesn't appear at the top of everyone's daily to-do list, but it is required by the state, and I look forward to working with the board, the committee, and the district staff for the best interest of the district's mission to educate the children of Manatee County. So does anyone have any questions of me, or we are going to go over the risk assessment report a little bit. Laurie Kidder is going to do that, and a brief flyby on the transportation and the sales tax surcharge report. So that's what we're planning. If anybody has any comments or would like any questions answered, we're all here to do it.
Is there any questions?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, let's move forward.
Okay, Laurie.
So I think we're actually going to start with Mark Smith first and let him go through the sales surtax and the transportation report really quickly, and then I will go through the risk assessment.
Okay. Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
I'm going to go first, the transportation department audit. We conducted this as part of the internal audit plan for the year. We determined to see if functions within the department were operating effectively, efficiently, and with appropriate internal controls and in compliance with applicable laws, rules, and regulations. Overall, a number of elements within the transportation department were determined to be operating effectively, and operating controls as it relates to the transportation department were rated as satisfactory. We did identify some areas to address that will enhance the control environment around the transportation department, and especially in regards to documentation of bus operator records, cycle counting of parts and fluids, and monitoring of fuel usage. We had 6 recommendations made during the audit: 2 high, 1 moderate, 2 low, and a best practice. You can find a summary of each of the recommendations on pages 2 and 3 of the executive summary. And these are accompanied by the corresponding page number where each recommendation is located, along with management response within the report. The 2 high-risk items are around transportation department with bus operator records and documentation. This is mainly to enhance the process to make sure that any kind of checks for driver training and also annual training that they receive are well documented. And already the transportation department, Gary Sawyer, transportation director, has already implemented and starting to put in a software to help track that. The other one around driver training was fingerprinting. That function, fingerprinting of employees, has moved from HR over to the security department to better fit in reviewing fingerprint results and taking the appropriate action. Management is on top of that already. Some of the other items, moderate, have to do with cycle counting. PeopleSoft, that module currently isn't working, but management is committed to implementing a manual cycle count process, and also looking into ways to have better, from a fluid standpoint, oils, things like that, to have it better monitored and accounted for throughout the school year. We did have a best practice recommendation in terms of charter schools and the rate that's charged for labor. Talking to the transportation department, they felt the labor rate probably should be looked into. Their rate is a lot less than some other counties in the state and outside mechanics. So that's also a recommendation for a cost analysis to see those direct and indirect costs, if there's an opportunity to just make sure that they're receiving fair compensation from the charter schools. So I don't know if anyone has any direct questions on the transportation audit.
Mr. Minor?
Yeah, thank you very much for the great job that you're doing. I'm wondering if you went into the examination to what extent senior people, office people, mechanics were subbing as bus drivers, and how their rates might compare with the bus drivers.
We did not look into that. So as far as mechanics that sometimes serve as bus drivers?
Yes, about a year ago, I did an investigation as to the cost of having, staff, man or woman, buses, as opposed to, the rates that we are paying bus drivers. And I concluded it would be less expensive for the district just to increase the compensation for our bus drivers to attract more than to put in the seats of the buses people that were staff, because we were paying a lot more for that. I thought it was, and steps were being taken to address that, and I think steps were taken, but apparently it's not sufficient at this point, because apparently we at least we don't have a audit to show to what extent staff is acting as bus drivers at a greater rate than what we pay the bus drivers. Thank you.
Yeah, we focused on the driver training and safety on this audit.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Kennedy?
Thanks, Gina. Mark, this is Charlie. I have a quick question for you about the ERP module that you mentioned. And I just want to be clear, is that just one piece of the transportation module that is not working correctly and we're working around right now, or the entire module itself?
As my understanding, it's just that piece, the cycle count feature, was not working. So they did not have a cycle count process in place, and they've committed to having a manual where they'll produce a number of parts per month and perform the cycle count on that.
Okay, so it's not the whole thing. And then Mark, one more thing too, on page 2 of the report, I just want to just take a second on the first bullet point, your first finding, to develop controls that ensure that bus operator records are supported and documented to comply with Florida statute. You've got that listed as a high priority. I'm just curious what, if you could just give a little more detail about that.
Okay. Yeah, so I took the guidance that the districts are to use to self-evaluate. My understanding that the state used to come in and perform a review, but they pass it on to the districts to perform self-evaluations every 3 years or so. And I took that guidance and looked at the state statutes as that pertains, and picked a sample and went through making sure they had the right training hours, the background check was performed, DMV records reviewed, they're included in the random drug test sampling, and a lot of the documentation just wasn't clean. Some of it was in a lot of different places, a lot of different locations. So Mr. Sawyer has had experience before consolidating that, having more of a database to keep track of things centrally. Also, the districts used to send to the state the training they received, the drivers, and then they would receive back a certification. That doesn't occur anymore. So it's a little difficult on some of the driving records to determine how many hours. So that's something they're going to implement, as well as to create an internal certification and have someone sign off officially that all the hours were obtained for each of the drivers. So a lot of the documentation was there, it just was not well organized and easy to identify. And this will help as they go through this database and update it. When they do their self-evaluation in the next year or so, they'll be ready for it to have not only the current staff members, but any new ones to check off that they've received all the appropriate information.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Yep.
Okay, I think that concludes the questions on this. You guys want to move forward with your next topic?
Yes, I'll go through the sales surtax. As it was mentioned before, the audit committee is charged with reviewing the sales surtax, and they had us, at their request, perform the procedures to verify that the recorded transactions were appropriate and obtain other information to complete their report. As previously mentioned, there were 3 items that, based on our sample, out of the 96 million total that the district spent in the fiscal year, that were not, I guess, fall in line with the sales surtax and bond resolutions. That was the PeopleSoft ERP, specifically charges associated with cyber software licenses, which were varied from 1 to 3 year purchases and other associated costs. And then part of the charter school sales tax block grant, one of the samples, Visible Men Academy, their expenditures that we reviewed that had to do with roof replacement on portables and a consulting fee didn't fall in line. So in addition to that, we had 4 recommendations, 3 moderate and 1 low. A lot of the recommendations that we had centered around better reporting to the board and the audit committee, and procedures that the district can put in place to approve, monitor those funds that are provided to the charter schools. We just had a meeting today. Lori and I attended with the charter schools, the principals, and went over the importance of ensuring that the funds spent from the sales surtax resolution are in line and appropriately spent with the guidance.
Any questions?
We have an audience member with no mask on.
Do you have any questions about this audit?
Good or no?
Okay, will you move forward with your next item?
All right.
Yes, this is Lori Kidder. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the risk assessment process. You should have a PowerPoint presentation that will help us walk through this. If you'll remember, we discussed this in the February board workshop, and we were asked to prepare an updated risk assessment. Just wanted to remind you that the risk assessment, a detailed or comprehensive risk assessment, is required by the state statutes to be done at least every 5 years. When you look at the internal auditing standards, They say that your internal audit should be risk-based, and the internal audit interpretations that go along with that say that you can do a 3 to 5 year risk assessment. However, you need to look at risk every year and address the highest risk areas each year. So we updated the risk assessment this year, the comprehensive risk assessment, because there have been so many changes due to ERP and other things that have gone on in the district. And so we wanted to, or it was recommended that we go ahead and redo that risk assessment. So we've done that. We worked very closely with the district, primarily Doug Wagner, on getting this organized, arranging meetings and performing the surveys. We did all of this remotely. You may recall that the pandemic hit shortly after that February board workshop. So the district employees were very busy and keeping the district going and educating the students. So the actual assessments and surveys did not take place until the latter part of April and continued through the end of June. So you have the slide presentation if you want to go to slide 2, and they're numbered in the lower right-hand corner. This just goes over the overview. We're going to talk about the process, the results, and the suggested internal audit projects. On slide 3, these are just a few bullet points relating to that the internal audit standard 2010.A1 requires the chief audit executives to develop a risk-based audit plan on an annual basis. The internal audit activity must evaluate the effectiveness and contribute to the improvement of the risk management process. The audit committee requested that we perform the internal audit, perform a district-wide risk assessment. The internal audit we used the industry standard. It's simple but systematic approach, leveraging management experience to determine the level of risks. We requested information on each division's internal and external risks through meetings with over 50 members of staff, management, the audit committee, and board members. We then evaluated risk scoring with subjective questions to suggest internal audit projects for audit committee consideration. On slide 4, we'll go on through this. This really is just going through the audit process again. Slide 5. This is a listing of the internal risk factors that we considered for internal risks, such as internal controls, segregation of duties, the complexity of the systems, policies and procedures, volume of transactions, that type of thing. External risk, we considered the job pool, we considered laws and regulations, training or lack thereof, the economic conditions, the materiality, growth, acts of God, revenue sources, etc. And then under business risks, we considered like any reorganizations in the area or new software implementations. So slide 6. This is a listing of the risk factors that we evaluated for each auditable entity as we went through this process. And I'm not going to read all of them to you, but I'll highlight just a couple. We looked at the existence of district policies, written procedures, frequency of the review of these policies and procedures. We considered whether they needed highly technical specialized skill sets for that area, the adequacy of staff turnover, if there was an opportunity for fraud, degree of regulatory oversight that might be there, degree of public and political scrutiny. So on slide 7, so this is the probability and severity ranking system that we use to measure the level of risk and its impact. The likelihood of risk is based on responses from the departments to the risk factors, which we just went over on the previous slide, on slide 6. The departments responded to statements containing these risk factors on a scale of 5 being highly agrees to 1 highly disagrees. And then based on their responses to the 14 risk factors, the end result is a ranking of 1 being remote to 5 being almost certain. And then the severity of occurrence is the consideration of the impact on the district if an adverse event does occur within the functions of the auditable units and is ranked from 1 being minimal to 5 being catastrophic. As noted, these rankings were determined by individual department heads, division staff were interviewed for their particular auditable entity. We then accumulated the scores of each of the auditable areas and met with management. So we had a meeting with Ms. Saunders, Doug Wagner, and Tim Bergeron. And we discussed the overall assessments that we had reached. For the most part, the overall assessments fell in line with management's expectations for the assessments. They did provide a little bit of feedback on some areas which resulted in minor changes in the risk assessments. And these changes were based on their overall knowledge that they had of the area. On slide 8, we asked subjective questions during our interview process to gain a better understanding of each area. And we use that in conjunction with the results of the risk assessment scoring. So slide 9, these are the auditable entities. There are 7 of them. They're listed on the right-hand side. And then you can see how they were scored in the risk assessment on this heat map. They're primarily in the yellow, which is kind of the moderate area. And we're going to go into more detail on this. And on slide 10, this is the audit universe. So this is each of these areas are inside of the auditable entities. And I'm going to show you, well, I have another example that you'll be able to look at and see that a little bit better. But this represents the results of the risk assessment surveys for each auditable area. You are also provided with an attachment A. If you can take a look at that real quick, it would be helpful, I think, for this part of the conversation. So you can see in more detail how the auditable entities are broken down into the areas that we had on the heat map. And you can see on this schedule where we ranked, and we have PowerPoint slides that show this too, but how each of the areas were ranked as far as likelihood and severity of occurrence, which gives the overall risk being medium, low, very low, high. The next column is, and I'm going to go over this on a later slide, but some of these areas are audited by other entities. And so we took that into consideration as well. We did list some board comments that we got back overall where there seemed to be consistent concern. Did the same with the audit committee. And then we have some general comments in here as well, things that we noticed as we were going through the risk assessment. Okay, so if you want to go back to your slide presentation, and if you'll go to slide 11. So slides 11 through 17, this is the detail that I was talking about that provides the risk rankings for each section of the audit universe, as well as the cumulative assessment for each auditable area. So on slide 11, for instance, you can see that there were 13 auditable areas that were assessed, and you can see what their scores are for likelihood of risk and severity of occurrence. And then we've come up with an average score for that area overall. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each one of these slides, but you do have them to look at. So we'll skip ahead to slide 18. Slide 18, this goes through some of the common risks that we noted as we went through the surveys, the interviews, and the risk assessment scoring. And we noted that there were concerns regarding systems and processes, which includes PeopleSoft, but relating to personnel, payroll, finance, and construction, which is labeled as capital expenditures on the attachment A. The impact of COVID-19 was also discussed relating to the district as a whole, including impacts on IT, funding, school safety, personnel, and the budget. We also noted some personnel changes, which are significant within the finance and the IT area. Now these changes, I'm not saying they're bad, they're not bad changes, but anytime you have significant changes like that, you take that into consideration when you're doing your risk assessment. So slide 19, again, this actually goes through and gives you a little bit more detail about the entities that do come in and perform audits on various areas within the organization. And as I said, those are labeled on attachment A. And then slide 20. So slide 20 is really kind of the conclusion of where we got to. So based on the risk assessment that we performed, we have proposed that the following areas be audited in the 2020-2021 school year. It's kind of hard to say. These areas are personnel, the construction, information technology, and sales surtax. Now, sales surtax is required annually, so it's not necessarily that it's rated higher risk, but it's required annually, so we have to do it. The risk assessment, as we were going through the risk assessment, there were concerns indicated with personnel, payroll, construction, finance overall, primarily relating to PeopleSoft, I think, in a lot of areas. We recently completed an audit of payroll. We did note that there were some PeopleSoft issues in that area. So we are not recommending that we audit payroll again because we just finished it. What we will do is we will do a post-audit review. And when we do that, that should allow us to address some of the concerns that related around the PeopleSoft, as well as bank reconciliations. So that will allow us to hit on some of those areas when we do that post-audit review. We understand that there's been a lot of changes in this area and a lot of improvement. So we look forward to going through that again. The audit committee requested that Silent perform an overall risk assessment for IT, and Barbara addressed that in her report, but that will address one of the higher risk areas that were noted in our risk assessments, which related to property records. And the main concern there that came up out of our discussions with staff was really kind of a cash component. It's nominal amounts, but so it was that and access, for example, to student records. And that was actually part of a PAR, looking at student records and access to that is part of a PAR that we're going to be completing from the AG report. And so we will be addressing some of that, but Silent will also address that area when they look at the risk assessment for IT. School safety was another area that came up on the risk assessment as high. We did not propose it as in and of itself as an audit because we feel that when we do the PAR audit for the transportation, we're going to be hitting on some of those areas that were of concern, as well as when we do the personnel audit, which we've recommended. Some of the areas of concern within school safety had to do with the student resource officers, contractor background checks, and employee background checks. And that's all stuff that we'll be looking at either through the personnel review audit, or PAR audit, the post-audit reviews that we'll do. As Barbara mentioned, the audit committee voted to recommend the risk assessment and the audit plan to the board. However, they did ask us to break out the risk assessment for PeopleSoft within each of the 7 components of the auditable entities. We are working on that. And the district's been making a lot of changes and a lot of improvements have been made relating to PeopleSoft. But as you're aware, between the last audit committee meeting and this board workshop, the district has been extremely busy with getting school up and running, and the IT department, especially with technology and making sure all the students have what they needed and access to the internet. So we, although we did make some progress, we were not able to complete this piece. So this is something that we will be working on. One thing I would like to say is that we do not expect the results of looking at PeopleSoft individually within the audit areas to change our recommendations for this year's audit plan. And that's because when we did our risk assessments, we looked at each audit area as a full piece, and that included the related PeopleSoft module for each of those areas. And that's how we considered and assessed risk. So, and you can see from some of our common elements that PeopleSoft did come up, and we will be going back and looking at those areas. I think that is it for my report on risk assessment. Are there any questions that Mark or I can answer?
Vice Chair Kennedy.
Lori, I just have a quick question for you on school security and SROs. And is there anything you can talk about publicly? I realize that's probably best saved for a shade meeting, but is there any more detail you can go? I'm just kind of curious because that's one of our red zone, along with property records. But I'm pretty sure I know what property records is about because we've been talking about that one for a little while.
Yeah, I think it just more, and Mark, you might want to step in on this detail because you were in the risk assessment, but I think it had more to do with making sure that there were enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, part of it was in our PAR would be making sure that their controls put in place to monitor their attendance at the schools, fall in line with the contracts with the different agencies, and that there's a review of that prior to, making payment to the agencies based on the contracts that they have. So we're reviewing the sample of timesheets completed, that they're on site for the required time.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Mark. That rings a bell. I forgot about the timesheet issue. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Reverend Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to the risk assessments, is there any comparative aspect to the audits that are conducted, or is each yearly risk assessment an independent risk assessment of the year prior?
Let me see if I understand your question, Reverend Golden. So you're asking if we do complete new comprehensive risk assessment every year?
I'm asking if the risk assessments that you do,
Okay.
in the 7 areas that you say are auditable, are they independent of each year preceding, or is there a comparative aspect to the risk assessments?
Okay, so we do comprehensive, what we try to do is a comprehensive risk assessment at least once every 5 years. That's what we just did. And then each year subsequent, we'll have this comprehensive risk assessment, but we will go through and make inquiries, meeting with management, maybe some of the areas that we have concern about. We'll ask the audit committee, we'll ask the board members, and we would then update the risk assessments based on any changes that might have occurred in the district, like over the next year. So yes, the risk assessment is really meant to be a living, breathing, if you will. I mean, it's something that needs to be considered constantly and updated as needed. Some large organizations update theirs quarterly. Right now, we'll do this comprehensive assessment. What we've been is once every 5 years, but we do look at it annually for anything that it might need to be updated for. Mark, do you want to add to that?
Well, before we go forward, because if he's going to answer, I want him to answer the other part too.
Okay.
It would seem like the base year, the base document is the document that comes out every 5 years. And what I'm really interested in is whether or not over that 5-year period, we met, exceeded, did not meet, based on the auditing, the goals. I know that we have a risk assessment, and there's some that are great, some that are not so great. That pericope that you listed there. What I'm really trying to find out is whether we're keeping track of whether or not from the base year, good, bad, or otherwise, are we making progress in terms of our risk assessments? Or are we just as unsafe today as we were the base year that we had 4 years ago? Are we just as insecure? It seems to me that I'm hearing a report about the auditing process and what goes into the auditing effort, But what I'm wanting to know is to what end are we, as a board, expected to use these results? Do we get better? Do we not need to get better? Do we need to consider some other, is there a best practice that we're overlooking? That's where I'm headed with my question. Do
Okay,
you,
so
you understand what I'm asking now?
I hope so. I'm
Okay.
going to try. So, as we determine our audit plan for each year and we do these audits, when the audits, and we've made recommendations, like Mark just went over the recommendations we had for the transportation audit and for sales tax. Those are suggestions for improvement to help the district get stronger.
Okay.
Do post-audit reviews. We're going to go in when they tell us that the action plan is in place and they feel that this is no longer an issue. We're going to go in and audit again those areas related to the recommendations where we had the issue. And the whole point is that we'll be able to document the improvement.
Okay. So the cycle of the auditing process is identifying areas, getting the people in those areas to furnish you, I guess, the hierarchy of needs that need to be addressed in that area, and then making a determination as to whether or not they have been met after consultation with management, and then after consultation with management and determining that they have not or have been met, taking corrective action. Would that be a fair statement of the way the process goes with respect to the auditing committee?
Right. So the process is that we've done this risk assessment. We've identified high-risk areas that we're going to audit. We'll do this audit. Potentially, we're going to have recommendations or findings. Management will provide an action plan to make those corrections, and then we will audit the action plan. It should come around full circle. So you see improvement and get reports of improvement.
But you will be
Yes,
bringing,
based on our annual risk assessment and audit plan
all right.
for a given year.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I really appreciate all of our questions, and I see that Mr. Minor has also signed up to speak, but I want to make sure that we also give time to our next committee that's also making a presentation. This was supposed to end 12 minutes ago. So I'm going to give Mr. Minor the final word, and then we're going to move forward.
Okay, thank you very much, and for all your hard work in assembling this information and distilling it for us. I have a question concerning the property records and the number 3 yellow ranking in terms of likelihood of risk. And can you embellish a little bit what was done to examine property records? My interest stems from a request I made about 8 months ago for records concerning improvements to the topography of the Palmetto High School campus. Since we, for about 50 years, have had flooding there, I wanted to know to what extent we had sufficient drainage, where the drains were, what's the piping, where does it go, things along that nature. And it seems like the responses were indicating, well, we really don't know, and it would be very expensive to provide that information to me. Well, I wasn't real happy about that, but at the same time, it revealed to me that we did not have, at that time, at least when I made the request, the documentation of changes to the topography, over a significant period of time. Yeah, and so my question is, why, what did you examine the record keeping of the property records as to construction improvements? Are they in an organized way? Are they computerized? To what extent maybe we're behind the county in computerizing and having available, for the public, electronic, showing of where lines are, be it cable or water and things like that. You can go online and see a lot of that with where the county has these things, but we don't have anything comparable. And I'm wondering what your suggestions about property records, to what extent you really delved into this.
Right, so all we've done is the risk assessment so far. It's in the IT area for some of the reasons that you discussed. This is one of the areas that will be looked at. It was recommended as part of the IT area that it would be addressed in that. And it might be a good idea before we actually start that audit that we talk to you, because it sounds like you've done some work on this, so that we can consider some of your concerns that you've identified.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I appreciate all of the audit committee's time. Is there any further items the audit committee would like to present before we move on to the Citizens Financial Oversight Committee presentation?
Chair Messenger, this is Barbara Vetter. Will you accept this? Will you approve these reports?
This is not the time period where we approve
Oh,
the reports. This is just the workshop.
Okay. All
But
right.
I appreciate your time, and I appreciate that you presented everything today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I will move forward with the Citizens Financial Oversight Committee presentation.
Good afternoon.
I apologize, we're running a little late.
Fine. Absolutely fine. We'll try to make it brief and not quite. Bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I do believe everyone got a copy of the report prior to. All right, awesome. Well, Madam Chair and Board, Ms. Saunders, thank you all for having us here today and carving out some time for us as we present our annual report on the referendum and the usages of the ad valorem millage monies to improve our schools and our student learning. You'll notice that our report is dated March 3rd, 2020.
Keep moving this.
Things have changed a lot in those last 25 weeks, amazingly. So we have our work cut out for us moving forward and catching up. Nowhere near the work that you guys have and what all's going on in your lives. But we do know all of these are important. I'm sure you've reviewed the annual report, and I'd like to thank Charlie Kennedy for his feedback to help ensure an accurate report to the board and to the citizens on their money. Our cover page describes an overview of our year, and then we'll get into the details with Bob Christopher, Chairman of the Revenue and Expense Deployment Efficacy Subcommittee, and then Bobby Stanel, Chairman of the Data Analytics Subcommittee. I'm not going to go through and read the entire report. Hopefully, we'll just hit the highlights. It is our finding that tracking and accounting the resolution revenue and resolution expenditures were in material compliance with the operating budget established by the district and approved by the board for the 12 months ending June 30th, 2019. No preliminary conclusions can be drawn at this time regarding the success of the resolution in accomplishing these goals. This is primarily attributed to time. A single year of data is not necessarily statistically significant in this circumstance. That said, certain data and analysis being measured at this time are presented in this report. Note that the CFOC has experienced difficulty in acquiring homogeneous data sets for comparisons of data before and after the commencement of the use of the resolution revenue. The CFOC seeks continued cooperation with the district administration and staff in that regard. It is the CFOC's opinion that all conclusions in this report are based on materially correct data. However, information and representations made by the district are subject to change. I believe that will satisfy the legal members on our committee. So the creation of the CFOC was brought part of the resolution to have an oversight committee. It's to oversee the goals of the resolution passed almost 2.5 years ago. The proper fiscal stewardship of ad valorem millage monies, to identify relevant outcomes and to report back to the community. We established 3 subcommittees: data analytics, revenue and expense deployment efficacy, and communications transparency. And it wasn't part of our report, but I added, Michelle passed out for you, the members of our commission and also the members of each of those committees from our committee, from the main committee. So I hope that will help you. So moving on to page 2 and 3. The items that we have brought to the board during, as recommendations during our past year. And when I say past year, that means we're going back 6 months before that, so it's confusing to me as well. So again, I'm not going to read it, but the first is core budget increases consistent with economic conditions. We just don't want the millage to replace the cost of living allowances. There was no action by the board. Lab equipment, 2.2 million in improvements in equipment and parish, the board agreed and moved. Number 3, the reserves of 3% should come from millage revenue. The board agreed and pulled from STEM as it hadn't been spent all in the first year due to ensuring that STEM expenditures fit the intent. It will stay earmarked to go to STEM when not needed for reserves. That was just one of the things we wanted to be brought in there. It came out of STEM money. We'd like to make sure it was still earmarked for STEM when there's no need for reserves. I think we all know about that. Number 4, payroll benefits costed incorrectly. The board agreed, and these expenses have been moved to correct amounts. 5, just for girls and other contract schools, recommended the board provide benefits comparable to referendum amounts where appropriate, and the board funded just for girls from general fund discretionary. Number 6, charter school expenditures consistent with resolution intent, not leases, bricks and mortar, capitals. It's for STEM, extra hour tutoring, etc. The board response was, via Steve Dye's review, that the charter schools must use money as the referendum intended, operational purposes consistent to the referendum. 7 is a climate survey, questions consistent with the 2015 survey, so that we would have previous data and current data to compare. The board agreed, and the survey included similar questions so that we could compare to see if there's any improvements due to the referendum money. And then the final was the exit surveys / interviews. They're a very important source of information as to why teachers, et cetera, are leaving the district. We requested that this practice be implemented, and the board began a formal exit interview process. And many COVID-related questions have been added since this report was processed. Obviously, that has something to do with it that we had no idea in March as far as people leaving.
Before you move on, Vice Chair Kennedy?
John, I just have a quick question on
Absolutely.
number 6 about the charters and their use of resolution funds. I guess I'll call it for lack of a better term. I'm assuming by now, it has been a long time, have those issues identified the issues at the charter school campuses where they had either spent it incorrectly? Have they all been I know there's only a few, but
Yeah,
have they
I
been
believe there were only
rectified?
2 or 3,
Yeah,
Charlie.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't answer it. I don't know. I know it was brought to their attention, and I was told that they were working on the reports to make sure. So, but we will check and see.
Okay, I just got a thumbs up from Doug, so I think we're good. I was
Then-
kind of assuming we were. It was kind of hanging out there as a loose end, so I just wanted to clear.
Yeah, I thought it had been cleared up, but I did not know specifically, and I didn't want to tell you differently.
Hold
Absolutely.
on, before you move on. Reverend
Yes,
Golden?
anytime.
Reverend Golden,
Yes, Madam
sign up to
Chair.
speak.
I want to ask a question about the CFOC membership for 2020-21
Yes, sir.
form that we were just handed. There are 2 blank spaces between Mr. Tokarts and Ms. Barber. And is it fair to say then that there are now 2 vacancies on the,
If you see on the first box that has last year's,
Yes.
I just kept a blank there for my own edification because the 2, Pat and Dina, are static members of our committee. They're members as the 2 labor heads or whatever title they have. So they are static members. They are not appointed. Whoever is in that position will be on the CFOC. So I just left a blank in there.
now okay, so the,
There's no specific, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There's no specific number that has to be on the committee, Reverend Golden. So I just put it in there and it left a blank.
I understand. I'm just looking at the 2019-2020 composition, and there's 1 space between Mr. Tokarz and Ms. Barber. And then in the 2021, there are 2 spaces between Mr. Tokarz and Ms. Barber.
I just didn't move their names up a list to keep one. I just moved them over.
Well, actually, what
We're
happened,
one shy of last year, if that,
yes, Mr. Christopher.
and Mr. Servin.
Okay. Since this is a workshop, I just need, because I'm not trying to be subtle here, I do not think that the CFOC is reflective of the demographics of the school system.
Okay.
And so what I would like to do, however that takes place, is make sure that whether it's 1 or 2 or more, that we give consideration to 3 things. Number 1, the ethnicity of people that are made up. Number 2, the issue with respect to the charter schools. I don't know whether there are any of the people here that have any involvement or any relationship to the charter schools. We just can't keep ignoring them, and we can't keep pretending that they aren't here. They are here. And 3, and most importantly, I'm how do I want to say this? I would like to see how the leadership of the CFOC, whether that's determined autonomously, or is that something that is recommended to us, and then we as a board, since this is the Citizens Financial Oversight Committee that reports to the board, if that is something we have a say-so in. And if that's not the case, I really want to have a discussion about that, because it seems as if what I'm being asked to do is to hear a report from a committee that created its own leadership structure. And I'm not complaining about that. I'm not saying that that's not so, but I just don't see where we have any say-so in terms of the 3 things that I'm talking about.
Yes, sir.
Composition, the demographical consideration, and the concern for, and that's not in the, it's not in the charter. It's not in the charter language. It's not anywhere there, but it is something that I want to raise now
Sure.
before my colleagues, in terms of how all of the citizens are represented by the Citizens Financial Oversight Committee.
To my understanding, the board appoints members to the CFOC. We do not appoint members to the CFOC. We recommend, and we did in this situation when we had people whose terms were expiring. We had 5 people whose terms expired this year, and 2 of them did not seek reappointment. 3 of them did, and we sent that to the board with our please reappoint these people, or they are interested. It's entirely up to you guys.
I think of the 3 things that I talked about, the only one thing that you all have concern, or that you all have control over at this point, is the voting that you do for who is your chair and who is your vice chair. And
That is correct.
the concern that I have with that is that that does not come to us as a fait accompli, but it comes to us as a recommendation. Because this committee is formed as a committee of the school board and reports directly to us. And so I'm wanting to make sure that we are not just peripheral figures in this process. This is a very significant effort that is being made to make sure that when we go back before the people in the future, we can say, we did provide the oversight necessary for this oversight committee to do its job. And I'm concerned that I've looked at this for 2 years now since I've been on this board. And the only African American that participates is Mrs. Howell, and she's not there as a representative of the African American community. She's there because she's the head of a union.
Well, I don't think anyone, I mean, I could represent the African American community as a white person. I mean, I'm a citizen of Manatee County, so I don't know if that's what we need. I mean, it should reflect the population of Manatee County. I could not agree more. But I mean, that, we have nothing to do with that.
I really believe that we're getting off of this report, but what I'd really like to do, Reverend Golden, is I think we need to have a good conversation about this committee, and I think you're bringing up some really valid points. I don't think it goes into what this report is today, but can we schedule a workshop so we can talk about those things, so we have a better conversation and we have the time allotted to do it? I'd really like to.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Minor?
Madam Chair, I think you handled that very well. I was going to suggest that myself. Have a workshop with respect to selection of officers and members, and having something more reflective of the community, be it racial, gender. I think there's 4 women on the committee right now of 8, so maybe gender is almost equal, but I think having a workshop on that is very appropriate. Thank you.
One of my goals when I was picked as chair was to have a joint meeting between each committee, and we've never really been able to get that point because of everything that's happened. But I'd really love to be able to get to that point because I think we would all benefit from that. So, but I would like for you to go on with this report, and I think we
Absolutely.
will get to that point. Hopefully, we're getting to that point now where we could have that kind of meeting.
All righty. So Mr. Christopher is going to take over from here,
Sure, thank you.
talk about his subcommittee.
Oh, like that.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm here to present the income and expense efficiency section of the report because I was the chair of that subcommittee throughout last year. If you recall, at the juncture, the 6-month juncture, we reported 2 issues with one with overtime pay was misallocated between the revenue, the resolution revenue, and there were capital expenditures that were occurred and charged against the, or budgeted to occur against the revenue. Those 2 issues were cleared up completely by the end of the year. There are no outstanding issues. The committee thinks I can't breathe as well through this, and my glasses fog up. We took a macro approach, and the Income and Expense Committee really looked at 2 things. Did we allocate the funds properly? Did we track them? Did we carry over the excess or shortage? And did we adjust by any extraneous items? And the answer is yes. I'm repeating what the chair said, but it's important that we did meticulously track the revenue and expenses and the reserves resulting from differences in those 2 amounts. I'd like to just quickly set out some terms that I'll be using forward. We looked at revenue, income and expenses, resolution revenue and expenses, and we looked at a term we coined as core revenue and expenses. Core revenue expenses are everything else, or the base before the program came into effect. The best example of the tracking is reflected on Schedule A and the supplement. And if you will note, this is a bar chart, but the expenditures are in orange, and the budget, the allocated amount, is blue. There were a couple of instances that we spent more than the allocation, and that will be affected in the following year by the budget. In most cases, we spent less. It's not alarming that these numbers are different because one is a budget coming over the transom of revenue as a result of property taxes. The other is a result of hundreds of thousands of transactions. They never match. Following that bar chart is the schedule of the actual tracking of the dollars. And this number is slightly different because collections did not meet the total billed revenue, but the $37,024,000 are the actual collections that the board collected in fiscal year 2019. To that, we added interest that was accrued of $286,000. As you will recall, revenues are collected heavily through November and the first half of December, and expenditures cover the entire year. So we're net cash positive for a large part of the year on these revenues. That's where the interest came from. We accumulated that to $37 million. The expenditures are listed. You'll see the reclassification of the reserve required by the state, leaving a over or under amount that will be carried to next year. And that's the crux of our charge with respect to revenues and expenses, right there. Exhibit B, what I tried to do is more of a macro. We feel, and I don't know how the board feels, but we feel that we were charged with at least an overview that the core budget was continuing to be allocated basically in the same areas that it had, and we're meeting our responsibility on budget growth, and not to use revenues, resolution revenues, to supplant or reshuffle. We do not and have not recommended to the board a formula approach, specifics, or anything in hard numbers. It's a principle. We don't think we have the power to do that. We don't think we should do that. We think that's the board's charge and the administration. But we've tried to take an overview of what happened. And this Schedule B tends to, the top half merely recaps total expenses, total revenues, and school district tax. So it gives you a feel. Ironically, total expenses increased 5% core, and 8% of our increase of 13% came from the resolution. This is the surprising part. Our revenue increased 5%, and school district taxes increased 5%. I didn't make those numbers up. That's what happened. So it gives you a feel of the tracking of core expenses and what the revenue is contributing, what the resolution revenue is contributing over and above that. As you see, resolution revenue will most likely grow at a much faster rate than your core. It gives you a big jump in the year of implementation, which you're all well aware of. Then it flattens out. It's hard to maintain the gains after that. But it will go faster.
Before you move forward, Reverend Golden?
No, I had a question after he finished his presentation.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. Schedule C is a detailed schedule, and I'm not going to drag you through it. I will apologize in the presentation. If you look under instruction, under core expenditures for the current year, the numbers appear wacky. We failed to eliminate the cents, and I would ask Ms. Boyes if we could reproduce that schedule and align the presentation for the file, for the report. But this helps us to further track core expenditures against resolution revenues. And it's more detailed, and you really want to go through. Beyond that, we tracked, and this is for the board and the STEM, the overall STEM budget, because that's a focus of attention of the community, I think, and I think the community's interested in that. It reflects the $2.2 million capital expenditures that were held back for the year, and it tracks actual expenditures against the adjusted budget so that we can see that we had trouble spending all of the STEM revenues last year. Implementation was a problem. The last thing I'd like to say is the cooperation we got from Mrs. Jenkins, Mrs. Taylor, particularly Doug and his group, and Jacob, and forgive me, I can't remember Jacob's last name. Davis. It was such a hard name, a very difficult. Davis. They were forthcoming. They were honest in their replies. We have total confidence in the staff and the information we received from them. Mr. Golden?
Yes, sir. Mr. Christopher, how are you?
Hi.
Thank you. You know, I'm gonna take these off because not being very helpful. Can you share with me, in the instructional training part,
Yes.
there's a capital outlay figure there, and I'm assuming that that's $23,200 and some odd dollars.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's an amount that we actually wound up spending. What? Well, that's what we
We
budgeted.
didn't spend any of that.
Okay.
They held it back. When we discovered the issue, I think the board agreed with that. That was not under the statute, allowable expenditure under the revenue.
Okay, so the real question that I want to ask you, we're gonna face some hard questions here coming up.
That's all right.
Okay. No, we're gonna face some hard questions coming up as we go forward in terms of our capital plan for the district. And I'm just wondering if the Citizens Financial Oversight Committee has an opinion, or would have an opinion, or would want to weigh in on whether or not it is provident to borrow money now, to do things now, as opposed to doing things later and waiting. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I know you didn't intend for me to ask you that question right here, but I
We
sure.
get as many answers as we have committee members.
Well,
My
but
answer would be, if it's spent judiciously, these are great times to borrow.
okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Right.
I appreciate you not embarrassing me up here. Thank you so much. Okay. That was it?
Yes.
Okay.
Vice Chair Kennedy?
Thank you. Mr. Christopher, I closed our meeting last week with this, but I'm just going to say it again, and I want to thank you for your founding chairmanship of this committee. You were handed an impossible task with 17 members, I think there were, at one point, and you handled it really well. It was really great to meet you and work with you, and we are definitely going to miss you and Steve around here a lot. I hope one of you all will pass this on to Steve, because I looked him up on LinkedIn, but I couldn't find him. I want to tell him that myself, but I'll find him somewhere. But I just want to thank you for all the work that you,
Well,
especially.
I've come to know many of you better, and it was been a rich experience for me. Thank you.
That is a very diplomatic
It has.
statement right there.
I mean that. And of the 17 members, I never complained. The individuals, I have never seen that many people come together with a uniform desire to help the board and to do good. And I didn't see any political moves one way or the other. They were there for a job and they did it.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Having seen you all at work many times, I agree with that statement wholeheartedly.
Thank you.
So, wish you the best. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you
sir.
very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bobby Stenell. I am the chair of the Data Analytics Subcommittee, and I'm going to be going over the relevant outcomes and results with you all. And so this starts on page 6. Pursuant to the resolution, the CFOC has identified relevant outcomes related to the use of the resolution revenue consistent with the stated goals of the resolution. So what this means, we picked out the 3 stated goals of the resolution: to increase student achievement, to recruit and retain teachers and staff, and to expand career and technical education and STEM programs to prepare students for the workforce. And then we tried to develop some key performance indicators and key measurables underneath those goals. And I'll apologize in advance, there is some hand-holding throughout this to basically say, we're presenting this data because we've collected it, but there's still not enough to draw any definitive conclusion. So bear with me through that. So first, to increase student achievement, the easiest measurable is school grades. And so obviously, one of the hopes for this referendum was to increase student performance, and one of the ways we see that is through school grades. And so you'll see this presented 3 different ways in these various charts and tables. And by, there's a general upwards trend since 2015 through 2019. After 2016, we didn't have any F schools, and at the end of the 2019 school year, less than 5% of the schools had a D grade or below. As you all know, there's no school grades for the 2019-2020 school year because of COVID and everything that's happened, and it's likely that any school grades that come out for the current year might be skewed or have an asterisk next to it because of virtual education and other complications with COVID. But we're going to strive to collect this data regardless. All we can do is collect what we can and try to draw conclusions from that. So with that being said, the positive trend preceded the resolution, so we cannot quantify the amount of improvement attributable to the resolution revenue alone. Other student performance metrics this committee intends to track include graduation rates and achievement levels as measured by the Florida Department of Education. We're placing special emphasis on performance in mathematics as the resolution specifically allocates funds to STEM programs. We further hope to review the correlation between school grades with other measurable results like teacher vacancies and retention. Which brings us to the second goal, to recruit and retain teachers and staff. So the committee has worked with district staff to collect sufficient information to establish a historical baseline. Unlike student achievement, this is an area where we would expect to see pretty immediate results. While the resolution includes both teachers and staff, we have placed special focus on teachers. Some of the relevant outcomes we have identified include teacher retention, teacher vacancy rates, number of teachers with advanced degrees, average number of years teaching experience, and number of first-year teachers versus experienced teachers. So this has been an area of frustration for us, as much of the historical information is stored in the previous enterprise management system, which the district no longer uses and has pretty limited access to. So it's been difficult to establish any sort of historical baseline there. However, with the help of some of the district staff, including Doug and Jacob, as previously mentioned, we were able to dig up some Excel files of historical teacher rosters for the elementary schools and calculate some of their retention information, which you will see on the graph on page 9. We've also correlated this with the school grade that each of those schools got in the various school years. So I found that there are 2 noteworthy items in this graph. The first is that schools with higher grades tended to have a higher retention percentage. The second interesting point is the spike in retention during the 2017-2018 school year and the dramatic decrease in retention during the 2018-2019 school year. It is important to note that we recognize that the retention percentages are going to be more heavily skewed by smaller schools with lower teacher populations. So if one teacher leaves from a school that only has 20 teachers, that number is going to look higher than if one teacher leaves from a school with 100. Moving on to the table showing teachers with advanced degrees. The table above shows the number of teachers in the school district with advanced degrees as well as the percentage of the total teacher population holding those degrees. There is a significant jump in the number of teachers holding advanced degrees after the resolution was implemented. Again, hand-holding, not enough information is available to determine if this is due to recruitment or of more competitive candidates, or if teachers that were already employed within the district completed advanced degree certifications during this time. Also important to note that the time periods when measurements were taken are not uniform, but it is the data that we were able to collect, and we felt it was important to present what we have. And the third overarching goal of this referendum is to expand career and technical education and STEM programs to prepare students for the workforce. So this is an area that falls under Doug Wagner's purview, and he's done a pretty great job, and the committee feels pretty comfortable with any information. Yes.
No, hey,
Oh, you're just waving?
no, I'm applauding, okay.
So we feel pretty comfortable with the information coming from Doug. The relevant outcomes that we measured are the number of programs that have been added and the number of students participating in these programs. Below you'll see some of the highlights, including the WAS program that was added at Palmview, the agriculture added to Sug Middle, the cybersecurity program added to Bayshore, and the various academies that have been re-implemented at Manatee High School. There are also 17 new STEM/Inspiring Elementary Engineering programs at various elementary schools, and the VEX IQ Robotics competition, which was held at the elementary schools, which sounds like it was a great success from everything I've seen about it. Other measurable outcomes we're going to look at are graduation rate, the number of industry certifications earned, and on-the-job training experience. Finally, in conclusion here, much more information is required before any definitive conclusions can be drawn. It is vital that the district takes a more hands-on approach with measuring the relevant outcomes of the resolution and using that information to guide their decision-making. In order for this committee to uphold its obligation under the resolution, we need more consistent, reliable information provided to us in a timely fashion and in a format conducive to data analysis. We are grateful for the help of the district staff members who have worked hard to get us the information that we have thus far, and we must work together to establish a more streamlined, recurring flow of information. This is particularly true for the relevant outcomes for teacher and staff recruitment and retention. Does anyone have any questions about this?
Reverend Golden, you signed up to speak?
Yes, I do. Sir, do you find that there's any value in the metric of measuring the increase in counseling costs, the increase in mental health referrals for our children as a consequence of having left school in March, thinking that they would come back after spring break, and now finding themselves in the middle of this high-stakes problem of whether to come back to brick and mortar, do hybrid, or do e-learning? Is there any value in terms of trying to keep track of the amounts of monies, the amounts of referrals, the amount of kids that are impacted just by this?
All I can give is my opinion on that. Since that doesn't fall under the referendum, that wouldn't be something that we specifically cover, but I encourage any and all efforts from the district to measure more, to analyze more information so they can make more informed decisions.
I know that it wouldn't fall under the language of the referendum, but I thought that part of the oversight that you would exert on our behalf is making a determination as to those things that impacted the use of referendum dollars. And I'm concerned here that we already have data, we already have information that says that our children are going to be impacted emotionally, psychologically, mentally, by the way we're having to deliver education going forward. And I'm just trying to figure out whether there's any value in the Citizens Financial Oversight Committee saying, by the way, because of this, because of these expenses that we have been keeping track of, we are sure that this has impacted a report that we might be able to give without the impetus of coronavirus.
Right. It certainly impacted what we are measuring and the various outcomes we've identified. The virtual learning environment and the stress that these kids are under totally throws a monkey wrench in everything that we were trying to measure. And so to the extent that the school district wants to try to quantify the impact of whether it's virtual learning or emotional stress, what have you, I'd be happy to try to marry that with our data to try to isolate some of these variables and hone in on the actual impact of the referendum funds. And so I would certainly encourage you to try to track that, but I can't say that it's something that we would be able to go out of our way to measure without some type of change to our charter.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, Vice Chair Kennedy, I'd like to give you the final word, and, because we're already
Oh, and then we're done?
about a
Okay.
half hour over our,
Okay, no, I'll be quick. I just want to kind of piggyback on where Reverend Golden was going. Bobby, I want to thank you because as you were speaking, and I read the report before, but this has brought a couple of ideas in mind. As you're aware, we've identified a couple of areas already where we as a board probably need to tweak our referendum language a little bit for 22, if and when the board does decide to go for this again, which I certainly hope we will. And I just want to bring these forward now, just to kind of plant the idea, plant the seed of the idea. But you touched on it, but it's really striking how in 2018 and 19 the retention was so different between the grades of schools. D graded schools particularly just really bottomed out there, where the previous 3 years they've been moving pretty much in sync. So that gives me a thought, and I'll bring it back up in the fall of 21 when we're getting ready to do this referendum again, hopefully, that potentially we could use referendum funds to provide a bonus for teachers who work at lower grade schools. I know the board's had a conversation previously about a Title I stipend or a Title I bonus. And the other one was, well, there's two more real quick. And again, Bobby, I'm just thinking out loud for the board's sake.
Yes.
But I do appreciate you bringing this forward because it kind of lit the idea. But if board members, if we want to see our teaching population get advanced degrees, perhaps we could use referendum funds to help them pay for that education. And then the same thing with MTC and career and technical ed. If it is statutorily allowed for, and I can't imagine why it wouldn't be, to use referendum funds to help our students and our graduates complete programs at MTC, for example. I think if we're going to use Manatee County taxpayer money, they should have to do the program at MTC. But anyway, I just want to thank you for the depth of the report, not just from your committee, but the other two as well. And it really, got some good ideas coming out of this report. So I thank you for that.
I'm glad. And if there's one area that I would really encourage the board to look at, it would be the HR area. We could just really use more data in that realm, because I know one of the big things is we were told we're losing teachers to neighboring counties because they're getting paid more there. And when we went to try to pull the historical data to see where we were losing teachers to, it was either inaccessible or didn't exist. And so I think that we really need to work on identifying how we're going to measure the teacher retention piece and making sure we have the underlying data to support any position used to promote a referendum in 2022 to the taxpayers.
And that exit interview really came out of the emphasis on that exit interview kind of came out of the work of your committee. So
Certainly.
we appreciate that, and we'll keep that in mind. Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great.
I'll be very brief in summary, swear. As both Bobby and Bob Christopher said, COVID has sent us into a Teams environment, a virtual meetings, but it hasn't slowed us down too much. It's very difficult to get together over Teams and go over financial statements and data, especially as intricate as this has been. We have been unbelievably fortunate to have Mr. Christopher on our committee. He spent countless hours. I would hate to know how many hours Bob Christopher has dug through things, and we're going to miss him terribly. He has set the ground for us, so we're counting on the district to be able to take all of his data sources and fill in the blanks for us. We don't need to keep recreating that every year and peeling it out, but we would request heavily that, and Jacob Davis has been awesome. We're very pleased with the direction we're going in. Tim Bergeron, we're real pleased that he's going to be with us and help us out. So we're very fortunate. And if I can just take one moment of personal privilege, I've got something for Mr. Christopher, if he'll join me.
Oh,
So
thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you for, you started our committee off tremendously. and I appreciate
Thank you,
it very,
John.
very much. Thanks
It's
so
in
much.
good hands.
Yes, Brady Chapman.
John was going to get you a cruise, but it didn't work out that way.
Mr. Christopher, actually, he set us up so very well, and we're very pleased. I tried to follow as closely as I could in everything he set up for us, and Brady Chapman's going to do the same thing. Again, I wanted to thank y'all for reappointing Susan Harrigan, Bobby Stenell, and David Ballard to a 3-year term, and also Cindy Spray will be a big help. But we will need as much help as we can getting all the data together of which we had. Huge kudos to Doug Wagner. He has been just so helpful in our meetings. And we would not be anywhere without Michelle Boyce. She's been like our rehab person and helper. And she's given us a lot of direction. She's given us a lot of guidance, so we appreciate her very much.
Call that thing when you have an intervention. No,
intervention.
She's an intervention.
Yeah, she's had probably several interventions with us. But thank y'all, and if you have any questions.
Thank you for all that you guys have done and all the time and the effort you've put in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
With that, we have 2 public comments. And I'd really like to assure that we have even a short restroom break and time to change our computers over. So Vice Chair Kennedy, I'm handing it over to you.
You got it, Mr. Nelson, you're up first. And Ms. Dana Lewis, you are going to be next.
I'll make it within 3 minutes. I'm back again with my same one-page handout with a very simple question. Why do you lie to us? That numbers I don't create, it's on your own reports. $300 million over 6 years. Like to read this. My question is a simple one. Other counties doing it does make it not a lie. All I want to know is, why do you lie about revenue on the budget page and not on the financial reports? Such as the monthly, AFR, and CFAR are different. Simple questions, simple answers. Shouldn't revenue be counted the same way at the beginning of the year as rather than monthly and annually? This question was sent to the chairperson. I got the information from the staff. It was called gobbledygook. It didn't answer the question. The answer needed is, what rules, statutes, best practices, or bylaws cause you to lie? Because if you can't answer this after 6 years, I'm going to escalate this to the state and find out why you have to lie. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Ms. Lewis? Ms. Lewis, thanks for masking up earlier. Appreciate it.
Well, since I was within 6 feet and the mandate says that as long as you can social distance, it's just really hard to breathe. So I was trying to be respectful and all that, but thank you.
Appreciate it.
So, Reverend Golden, you had mentioned something about the kids. I will let you know exactly how this is affecting our children. I came here today super hot, upset, because my child for the past week has been, on Thursday, last week, he came home with a headache. On Friday, he was dizzy. Yesterday, he almost fainted at school due to wearing a mask. They are not allowed to wear shields anymore, right? They can't even wear a hybrid. I purchased a hybrid that would cover their nose and be down, so it's respectful and it's what you guys need. But when you guys got rid of the masks, you really put it really hard. And then no, there was the loophole. The loophole was that you can get a doctor's note. And I was like, no, wonderful, because I want to be respectful. My child wants to go to school. Perfect. I called my pediatrician. The pediatrician said, I'm not getting in this. She's like, I'm not writing notes for anyone. And I said, I don't want him to be exempt from the wearing the mask. I only need him to be able to wear a shield when he's at his desk. He's there for 7 hours. And he's getting dizzy and nauseous. He has to go to the bathroom just to and splash his face with water. And I'm his mom, and it breaks my heart because I can't do anything. I could stay at home, but I'm not a teacher. My husband's police, he can't stay home. And I don't know what to do. I spoke to the principal today, and he said, I'm so sorry, there's nothing I can do. And I said, what happens when you guys get the virus? He says, we have to do the virus and the masks. I said, so what do I do? So I don't know what to do. So I would like for you to bring this up again, because this is hurting all of our kids. I spoke to so many moms that have chosen the e-learning only because their kids cannot wear the masks. If Shields is the answer, let's do the Shields. I don't mind if we're trying to do this thing together, that's fine. But we cannot request something that they cannot do. And believe me, I have a whiny child, and that's not the one that's whining. My 7-year-old is the whiniest, and he's dealing with it. But my 10-year-old says, Mommy, I said, I can't breathe. And I called the ENT. The ENT wasn't willing to do it. The pediatrician wasn't willing to do it. I have calls out to so many doctors and I'm just waiting. So I sat here for 2 hours, paid for a babysitter so I could tell you, because I figured an email would not be enough. I want you to see my face and hear my frustration. I want to help my child. I want you to hear my heartbreak. And I wish my son could be here. And he was going to be, except that I said, buddy, I said, you're probably going to have to wear a mask. And he said, I just left school, Mommy, I can't. So I want you to hear my heart. And please, at your next meeting, consider the kids. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Yeah, Mrs. Lewis?
Mr. Titlebaum will talk to you about a way we could possibly help you, okay?
That's it.
Okay. It is 5:37, and I am going to adjourn our workshop, and we will have our board meeting in 8 minutes.